Hello, welcome to Our Revolution, Helena. We have been, this is the 6th meeting and my first time as a host. Nice to be here with Frank Kromkowski. They have been dealing with issues of current interest. You said gun control. What are some other things you've been talking about,
Voter
Frank?
registration, big money in politics, things like that.
And today we are talking about, of all things, the Trump presidency. There should be anybody paying attention right now. There will be a lot to talk about on this subject. So Frank, let's take it away. Do you want to make any general statements about how you feel about our current president?
Well, this is a very difficult topic because there certainly are lots of varied opinions. But I've written mine on Facebook and elsewhere to say that Trump is an authoritarian fraud who has done so many things to undermine democratic processes in the United States. He has continued his actions as a bully, which he's very good at. He's an ultimate con. As Tony Schwartz, who wrote is the actual writer of Trump's book, Art of the Deal, and Tony Schwartz said Trump did not write one word of that book. Tony Schwartz now says, and he said many times, Trump is a con. He lies, but he calls it hyperbole. And so my thought is that I'm very distressed, like a lot of people, and not clear about how to handle this, but it is amazing that we have as a president a person who George Will, conservative Republican, very polite guy, has called a bloviating ignoramus. And I can only say I second that thought and say if there is such a thing as a bloviating ignoramus cubed, it would be Trump. He does not read. He does not study. He does not prepare. He can't seem to remember from day to day what he has said to people. And he has embarrassed us in so many ways. Now, there are a lot of people I've heard, and I've talked to some, who think he's the greatest thing since Swiss cheese. And I'm trying to figure out why they believe those kinds of things, because that is not my opinion at all.
Well, you said something right off the bat, used the word con. If that's indeed the case, he has conned the American people. We have been conned by our new president. How did we get conned? I mean, do you have a sense of how a man like that became president of the United States?
Well, when I think back to 2015 and 2016, I remember that the Republican Party was in total disarray. They had 18 candidates, or 17 or 18 candidates, but that array of candidates did not reflect a grassroots strength in the Republican Party, but a grassroots weakness. So Trump somehow bulldozed his way through that by ridicule, by exaggerations, by promises that had no basis in fact, like the fact that immigration is a big crisis. It's not a big crisis. Immigration has been declining. But he somehow sold people on the idea that somehow our United States is being overrun by rapist, ignorant immigrants. There's nothing to that at all, but he was able to build and take over an extremely weak, in disarray Republican Party. And then, of course, the Democrats had a great candidate in Bernie Sanders, but a very weak candidate in Hillary Clinton, who not only ran a poor campaign, as most commentators would say, but still apparently has not grasped how weak her candidate was, or candidacy was, and how it failed to reach out to the grassroots people who know that somehow the American dream is slipping away from so many people, and think that we need to make America great for the ordinary persons. Trump tapped into that feeling of resentment that somehow everybody's getting ahead but not me, the middle class, the lower class. But he had no plans for really addressing that. He had a group of slogans which appealed to a group of people who I can only say, from what my contact with Trump voters, don't really study that much, and rely on Fox News for sound bites, and simply have no critical inner resources to resist the superficial slogans of someone like Donald Trump.
It seems to me there's some reflection of the Bush years too, George Bush in 2000, where so much of his constituency was among what we could call the lower classes. and he certainly represented the multi-million-dollar class and the super rich, much the same way that Donald Trump does. And to me, it's rather a mystery why people would look to billionaires that have never done them anything to somehow pull them out of this abyss that you describe. How do you think, I mean, how must they feel about a billionaire like Mr. Trump that they could find him to be of some salvation? Is that just simply ignorance or misinformation? But we saw it during the Bush years, and it looks like we're seeing it again here.
I'm not sure that anybody has yet understood the full complexity of how Trump has operated, how he got elected, and how he operates now. Even today, we're talking July 19th, a day after Trump has tried to explain some of his comments at the meeting with Vladimir Putin the other day. And the reports in the press, the more critical press, are that not even Trump's staff can figure out what his position is and what actually happened in the secret meeting with Putin. So I think there's lots of mysteries, even with people who were very close to him. But there have been a good number of people who have tried to study Donald Trump. David K. Johnston, an economist and journalist, has written a very interesting book called Trump, It's Worse Than You Can Imagine. And then there's a very conservative thinker named David Frum, F-R-U-M, who's written a book called Trumpocracy. And in his chapter on resentment, called Resentment, Frum says, what explains how Trump got in there? He says, there aren't enough crackpots in the United States to actually elect, this is quoting David Frum. He says, there aren't enough crackpots in the United States to elect someone like Donald Trump knowingly. So the explanation must be that he's tapped into something, and Frum says it's a series of resentments because lower class people have been left behind. That's why Bernie Sanders was so popular, because he was addressing the needs for health care, for housing, for decent treatment on the part of working class people. Now, Trump somehow got some people to believe, or a good number of people to believe, 3 million less people than even believed Hillary with all her pathetic campaign. But he did get them to vote for him and, squeaked by in what was not the most astounding electoral vote in history. Typical Trump lie and maybe he believes these things. But his modus operandi seems to have been exaggerating and tapping into secret sources of resentment that people have. And so it's tough to figure out exactly how to deal with that, because unless we do deal with the sources of those resentments, people do not have health care. Here in Helena, Montana, homelessness, hunger, lack of housing is a tremendous problem. And there are people who are trying to address those. But health care in Montana is slipping away from so many people. And there are lots of things that are happening now, including with the new Montana Public Health Care Coalition that has been formed just recently to bring to the Montana legislature a new proposal for dealing with the tremendous health care cutbacks that the last legislature, the 2017 legislature, put forth in a heartless way. So people are fighting back. But Trump has tapped into a lot of those feelings that things are wrong, things are going wrong. But if you can believe that Trump is going to do something about them, all you have to know is that his tax cuts, which he promoted as the greatest thing on earth, have primarily benefited the richest 1% in the United States. And what little tax cuts there were for middle-class people will fade out in a couple of years. We know that Trump somehow manages to go from day to day without getting briefing from his intelligence briefers, and then goes on and says things and does things without even consulting with some of his most respected advisors. Now, you may be skeptical of those advisors. You may not think that the FBI and the national intelligence agencies and the CIA are the most trustworthy and esteemed organizations that some people think they are. But with Trump, if he's going to go from day to day trusting his own instincts when he has never studied an issue apparently a day in his life, Is that an exaggeration? Well, all the evidence is that Trump, misstates things left and right on a daily basis, whether it's about the immigration crisis or about Syria or about President Putin or about Robert Mueller from the FBI. If you understand that Trump is a habitual exaggerator based on no research, you wonder how we're going to get out of this mess alive.
Yes, and back to George Bush, he pulled the same scam basically by appealing to the lower classes through some kind of populism that I have yet to understand. But one of the first things he did was cut taxes for the super rich. It's the same game that Trump played too. And I'm just not sure why the lower classes can't see that right off the bat, that this does not represent us. So if I hear you correctly, then it's not, obviously there's nothing intellectual about that. It's an emotional thing that's drawing them, that resentment, that anger. And they're tapping into that, and people are being led for all the wrong reasons. So this will simply, if we don't understand this, it will repeat itself. So number one, why are generally, I think white people that support Trump so very resentful when they have some of the least reasons in the country to be so, compared to blacks and Hispanics, let's say. But not only why are they resentful, but then how is that tapped into in such an illogical way? And I don't want to really, beat this subject to death, but it seems so important to me because I saw that in George Bush's time, and now we have it again post-Obama. And I'm afraid that if we don't understand what's going on here emotionally, then we're going to be stuck if we even get out of the Trump presidency alive.
And part of what I think has to happen is for first of us, those who oppose Trump, to take a deep breath, try to understand the sources of our inner strength ourselves. So that just fighting Trump and hating Trump is a dead-end street. That is not a way out of this. But we have to, I think, recognize, as Bernie Sanders and lots of people have, Ralph Nader and others have recognized over the last 20, 30 years, that in spite of all the hype about this being the greatest democratic nation on earth, democracy in the United States has been very weak. It's been very weak, so that very few people participate regularly in the political process. You could go to the Democratic Central Committee meetings here, and you realize that there's a small group of people there. And that's just in Helena, which is a Democratic city, in terms of its voting processes. But Montana is a Republican state. And so only FDR, back in the 30s, won the presidency campaign in Montana. And the other one was Bill Clinton. And it wasn't because Bill Clinton somehow captured the secret. He got 34% of the vote in Montana, and Ross Perot had 30%. And so it was a lucky fluke that Bill Clinton and the Democrats won in Montana. But in Montana, the Democratic Party is weak. And across the country, democratic processes are weak, because we have voter suppression activities all across the country, people having the feeling that their representatives don't listen to them. You can write to Gianforte, you can write to Daines, and you'll get an answer that will start out with, "I'm so happy that you wrote to me, and I'm always interested in your opinions," and blah, 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 tell you nothing. But this hasn't been just with Gianforte and
going on for a while.
It's been going on for a while. And one of my favorite examples is Max Baucus. He was known as a popular Democratic senator. He won several times. But if you remember back in 2011, when Baucus was on a group called the Super Committee, it was a committee of Republicans and Democrats in Congress who were supposed to come up with a plan to avert financial crisis and propose cuts in the budget so that we wouldn't have to go through what they called a cutback across the board. Now, Baucus, back in November 2011, put a proposal that was the worst of all the proposals in the committee. He proposed to cut Medicare, cut Medicaid, cut food stamps. This is a Democratic senator. So you see that even if Democrats at the leading edge can be so backward, you have no wonder why the people are not flocking to the Democratic Party as an alternative to the Republican Party, as bad as that party is and as bad as Trump is. So one of the solutions is to figure out how we can rebuild basic democracy in the United States. Our Revolution Helena is one of many groups that are trying to do this by looking at the power of dark money in politics to see who's paying for the ads that come across. Who are these donors and how much money are they giving? We're looking at building a constituency to find out how we can support single-payer health care, universal health care for everybody, to get rid of these insurance companies who are simply ripping people off and have been doing that same thing for decades. And to do those kinds of things, because the surveys always show that people want universal health care. And at the time that Baucus was leading the attempt to get Obamacare passed, he wouldn't even allow people to come to his hearings to talk about a public option. And so we're looking back at a series of things that have depressed public participation in the democratic processes. So a lot of people are very discouraged about that.
And that's, you say, on both sides.
On both sides.
The Republicans. So you're making a point that the whole system needs work. You can't just support the Democratic Party because they are also, would it be too strong a word to use, corrupt, or just beholden to money interest or whatever's happening? I mean, so with our revolution, are you doing an end run on the political system, or are you trying to rebuild it out of the Democratic side? I mean, Bernie Sanders is an independent, I believe. Our revolution is an independent movement.
Yes, it is an independent movement. So our Revolution Helena is not a local branch of the Democratic Party.
Interesting.
I have lots of good friends in the Democratic Party, and I supported lots of the local candidates who actually are great champions for health care and for good things, such as Marianne Dunwell and Mary Cafaro, two of the greatest people I've ever met in my life. And they fight hard for working people and for health care and for decency and for fair taxes. But a lot of people have given up on Democrats as being able to do that. And of course, across the state of Montana, it's very discouraging, because Democrats do not control either the House or the Senate in Montana. And so something as common sense as expanding Medicaid in Montana passed by one vote in 2015. That was by the vote of one Republican, Buttrey from Great Falls, who was talked into going against the Republican Party at that time, and Chuck Hunter and others, leaders of the Democratic Party in the legislature. By the slimmest of margins, were able to pass that. But what they passed for expanding Medicaid coverage to an additional 70 to 100,000 people was a measure that sunset in 2018. So at the end of this year, that Medicaid expansion will go down unless the next legislature passes something to replace it, or the Healthy Montana Initiative, I-184, passes in the referendum that is coming up in November.
So we have run out of time. I can't believe that was the first half hour. I've been talking to Frank Kromkowski with Our Revolution Helena, and we'll be back again next week for a little more conversation with Frank. There's a lot more to talk about. We have been dealing with the Trump presidency and what's going on in America right now. And Frank, thanks for coming in and talking to us, and we'll see you next week, and we'll further this conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Will.
Goodbye for now.